Welcome to Unapologetically Sensitive, where you can learn, relate, laugh, and maybe even live a bolder, brighter life. I'm your host, Patricia Young. This is a weekly podcast where we explore the strengths we have because of our sensitivity and some of the challenges it poses as well. The information in this podcast is not a substitute for help from a licensed mental health professional. Hey there. To the creatives, healers, sensitives, and deep thinkers, welcome. How are you? Today's episode is with my beautiful co-host, Jennifer Perry, and I think you're really going to enjoy it. As usual, we had a topic in mind and we switched gears because what we started talking about in the beginning is just kind of how discombobulated Jen was when we met to record. And the gifts of showing up messy, and what are the things that make it hard? Our fear of being judged, our perfectionism, our fear that things are going to come undone, things are going to get out of control, living up to standards and thinking that everybody else has it together and we don't, and being very focused on others and their expectations and what we think we should be doing to meet those expectations, and learning how to turn inward to get clear about what is it that I want? What do I need? What can I do? What am I not willing to do? And trusting that, and that process of you go from looking to the external and that fear of letting go to how do we internalize and get that sovereignty with ourselves. So we talk about this. I think that it's really great. We talk about meeting us where we're at. Jen talks about decontextualizing things and what that is and how we tend to go into self-blame. The difference between running on a hamster wheel when we're trying to be and do everything as opposed to maybe being on a path and being more grounded. I think you're really going to enjoy it. During this episode, Jen mentions the term nesting. And after we recorded, I said, I think I'm going to talk a little bit about what that is in the intro. And she's like, you mean not everybody's in my head? So if you're not aware of it, one of the ways that families that are divorcing or separating or living in two households is instead of having the kids go back and forth between two households, the kids stay in a primary residence and the parents come in and out. So obviously the parents or partners need to have another place that they live when it's the other partner's turn to come into the home. So when Jen talks about nesting, that's what it is. I think that's it. And now on to the show. Hey, Jen, how are you?
Hi, Patricia. I'm okay.
Yeah?
Yeah, thanks for right before we started giving me a chance to. It's almost like, you know how with little kids you let them stand up and wiggle
Mm-hmm.
and get their wiggles out.
Yeah.
I feel like you really do that for me, but it's all of my, whether they're just emotional or psychological pressures or the stuff of the day. I love that about you. You always create this space for me to get those wiggles out, and what was looking like maybe I couldn't even really feel like I could show up today. And I don't know, I name them, and it's kind of like naming gremlins, and I wasn't feeling well, right? I ate a cookie. It feels like stick to my stomach. I've got a million things going on, and I don't know. I love it. You let me say it, and I say it, and I feel my feelings about it. And then, hey, look, now I'm feeling grounded and better. And thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. It's taken me a while to learn to put the relationship before everything else. We joke about my tasky brain, and my tasky brain can be like, we have to record, and we haven't recorded the last 3 times, and you get into that pressure of having to get the task done. And we had talked about, we've had a challenge. You have 2 places that you record from, and one of the places the recordings always work out, and the other place it doesn't always work out. So we also talked about maybe today is about just figuring out why there's buffering when you record from where you're at today. And so you were apologetic about, I know I'm late. Well, you were on time, but then had to get things set up. It's really nice for me because I came from a history of being incredibly rigid about things. Well, I mean, look at our first meeting. If you can't show up on time.
I love it.
And so I think that there really is a benefit that when we can put the relationship first, the rest will fall into place. And it's hard. I think that when you haven't had a lot of control in your life and you have to try and find things that you can have control over to get a sense of mastery, can really create friction in relationships because it's not about trusting that everybody can get their needs met.
Oh, absolutely. I'm so glad. I think we're really onto something here. It's funny, you're making me think of right now I'm presenting, I'm helping facilitate an 8-week women's group, post-divorce women's group,
Mhm.
and that is exactly what we're leading with. I mean, we are all overwhelmed, kids of various ages or not, but jobs and single parenting and all of that, and really the big emphasis that allows everyone to even just be there and get what they can out of it is show up how you are. It's okay to be messy. What do you need? How do we take care of you? And then once you
Mhm.
spend a few minutes doing that, it's like, oh, I'm here. I'm safe. All of me is welcome. And there we go. It's really been amazing. I love that you said that, right? It's like relationship first.
I think what we're talking about is really important. This theme has been coming up with my clients a lot this week. I think especially over functioning and wanting things to be a certain standard, that fear of if I don't do certain things a certain way, then people are going to judge me. What does it mean? And how do we relax and lean into just being exactly where we're at and trusting that if we let go, that things will get done.
Yes, it's really meeting life on life's terms, isn't it?
Mhm. Mhm. It can be so
Mm.
scary to do that because I think there's this fear no matter what it is. If I didn't paddle for a week and I could have gone to that place of like, "Oh my god, I'm never gonna paddle again. I'm gonna gain weight. I'm," or if our food gets off track, "Gonna gain weight. I'm never gonna get back on track," or we that fear of getting behind or not being caught up. And we push ourselves often more than we have to, but that fear of I'm going to get behind or I'm going to lose something or I'm going to, if I start having my feelings, I'm going to get stuck in my overwhelming feelings. And so we kind of are like running on this treadmill and not going anywhere, a hamster wheel. And how do we learn to trust that that's not how it has to be?
Mm. I think you're onto something there with the difference between running on a hamster wheel in our minds of what everything should look like versus really letting ourselves be in context. So I'm picturing like a path, right? I hike a lot. So instead of in this hamster wheel up in my head of how things should be and what if and this and that, it's like, nope, I'm grounded. I'm on the earth. There's a rock here or a boulder there to step over, and I've got to grapple with this. And I'm communicating to my community.
Yeah.
We started out today with what are you bringing into the space with you? What are you
Hmm.
carrying? Because if we come in and we assume like none of us are carrying anything and we're just going to be at that task, we're not taking into consideration just all of the different things that we're all going through. We're all in a context
Right. Right.
and we can be so helpful to each other.
Yeah. Well, I think there are two things that I'm thinking of. One is this belief that everybody else has their shirt together and we're the only one that doesn't. And so we're always hustling to keep up and look like we've got it together. And the second part of that is using mindfulness in a way to let go of something just a little bit and get curious about what happens if I let go of this. And we're so accustomed to being uncomfortable in our pushing and not allowing ourselves to rest. And it can be incredibly uncomfortable to let go and sit in that anxiety of things are going to fall apart if I'm not micromanaging or I'm not over functioning, and using mindfulness and some distress tolerance in that space of letting go and noticing what happens. Do things fall apart? How bad is the discomfort? To see how much we can let go of. But it's a hard thing and it's really challenging to try and, well, I find it challenging to have people trust that they can let go because often we see the details, we do things a certain way. If we let go and we let somebody else take care of it, they don't do it to the same standard, they don't hold the same information. There is some truth in that, but how do we come from this place of being on that hamster wheel to switching to being on the path and slowing down? What are your thoughts?
As you're talking, I'm thinking about how decontextualized we all are.
Say what that means, decontextualized.
Think of all the self-blame, right? The self-violence that's I'm not showing up. Everyone else has their shirt together. Right? We've taken ourselves out of life. If I walk in to a situation and I was up all night with a sick child, or I was dealing with a busted water heater, or whatever the things in life may be, or now I'm transitioning out of nesting. And there's all of these things. I'm not in the same stream every time I come in somewhere. So when I say decontextualize, like I think about how this crazy independence, individualism, we don't see ourselves broadly, I don't think, as part of an ecosystem, as part of a context with both a historical context and a present day context. There's so much harm, I think, that's done in that taking out all of those contributing factors and thinking it's just us. And so we're to blame, and we should this and we should that. And none of the wisdom of we are part of a system. We don't call all the shots. There's a lot in life that's not in our control of, and we meet it. Can we come into it with a big heart? Can we come into it with an open heart? Can we come into it with some bravery? And if we're not, can we reach out for help? Because there's also others, like we're also isolated. We're also alone. And even in just that hamster wheel, we're just alone on our wheel. Like, no, there's a whole world here that we are a part of.
Right. It's so hard to get to that place, though, I think, because so many of us have gotten messages about, "Ugh, you make such a big deal out of things. Ugh, you're so sensitive. Why do you always have to do this?" And when there's it's a low level of wounding, but it's so pervasive.
Mm.
And so many of the clients that I work with struggle with feeling like it's their fault. And so the first thing is just what you're saying, decontextualizing everything and to see that it's part of a bigger system. And then one of the stories that's on my mind, I was working with a client recently, and there's a very strong cultural aspect that kind of ties into being an HSP, where there's a lot of expectations around group culture and what everybody does as a group, but some really high standards around get-togethers and having kids and what people should be doing. And what we talked about, and my client, like me, you know, this isn't what my client said, but I'll bring the chips. Where other people, there's a get together and they bring very intricate dishes that are related to this culture, and they're having this get together, and there was a text about who would bring what. And thank goodness my client chose the thing that was simple because that works for them. But the person who got the complicated dish, my client felt guilty about that and reached out to this person and said, "Hey, if you need any help, I'm happy to help." They don't want to do it. But that guilt and these expectations, and what we talked about is like, what if everybody is going, why are we making this so complicated? But everybody feels like they have to keep up with everybody else. And we often don't know that because we feel like we don't want to be judged. We don't want to be that person. And if we don't have honest conversations, then we don't know. The reality in this situation is I think 2 or 3 of the people in this small group really enjoy cooking and this ornate stuff. But for my client, with everything else that's going on, it's hard being a professional and a mom and all these other things. It's just too much.
Yeah, I'm smiling because I'm thinking about my own things going on right now and my aspirations for my daughter's sleepover party, where in my
Right.
mind I have, oh my God, I saw this picture of this slumber party. These people will come to your house. And of course, I'm trying to replicate it with like little air mattresses and tents and fairy lights.
The glamping.
Yeah, in the living room, I'm going to push all the furniture off. And I've got all of these really, really lofty ideas. And I also know, depending on my context, that day or the few days leading up to it, we could all just be like having pizza on the couch. It
Right.
may not happen. So that's taking into consideration that my performance is not just me. Like it's also everything that's been going around me, my inner resources. I'm pretty humble nowadays about my limitations as a
Right.
human being. But is there space for? So I'm laughing at myself because I feel like I embody both the I might just bring a bag of chips,
Right.
and a lot of times that is what it sort of goes down to, and I have to forgive myself and just be gentle when my full vision doesn't get pulled off.
Right.
I still have the visions. And I think it's because I know I'm a soft landing place inside myself. And that's hard
Mhm.
won. That's self compassion practice,
Right.
years of it for it to be like that. But I think that it's like a mindset. If we could just all appreciate that everyone has the same 360-degree, like technicolor, complex life with a bunch of the details are different. But what's that word? Sonder, right? That awareness that everybody's
Mhm.
life is as multidimensional and complex as your own, both internally and externally, and just really start to appreciate those contexts instead of evaluating ourselves as though we're some sort of constant. Sometimes I'll say, we're verbs, not nouns, and we're
Right.
verbs that are hiking on a path with weather and topography that can be challenging and everything else.
Right. Well, I think the bottom line for me, my ideal is to be internally focused and to focus on what can I do? What do I want to do? What am I capable of? What are my limitations? And to come from that place and to own it and accept it. That's the ultimate. However, if you are the mom that I was talking about and you chose to show up with something that's not the culturally appropriate fancy snack, there is this fear of being judged. And I was just talking to the people that I paddle with, we do coffee afterwards because I'm back in that fear of like falling out of my kayak. And I was talking about that yesterday. And somebody called me out and said, what if you didn't worry about being judged about that? Because I'm not sure always that the people that I paddle, they're lovely people. Some of them listen. I'm a little afraid saying this. I just have that thing of like, I don't know that I'm wired like everybody else and finding places where I do fit in and how much do I share about my discomfort. The nice thing was this woman was saying how far I've come since I started paddling because we're starting to do skills training and I want to start to learn how to do a 360 in the kayak and learn how if I fall out, how to get back in by myself. So it was pertinent to the conversation. But talking about that fear of falling out of my kayak again, like I hate that it's up for me and I paddled. And that fear of being judged if I share this stuff. So while I'm talking about I want to show up and be authentic and be me, I still have this fear of being judged.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
that's hardwired into us. I'm curious about this as being HSPs with our right highly sensitive nervous systems. That wanting to belong
Mhm.
or that fear of judgment, that is hardwired into that primitive part of our brain, that reptile brain, that amygdala, that fight or flight.
Mhm.
Because when it was forming through evolution, have we talked about this on the
We
podcast
haven't.
that
No.
yeah, so we're really, really tuned into that. It's like high school. You could have 99 people coming to your party and you're going to fixate on that one that doesn't want to. We come by that really honestly. And I think as HSPs, even more so, because when that was forming in these small hunter gatherer groups, if you were not conscious and aware of your social standing within the group and you got booted off I think this is why we love Survivor so much. We get booted off the island, you were going to die.
Mhm.
You were gonna be dinner that night for some wild animal. Would not have access to fire, to shelter, to food, to the community. So it's hard. We freak out for good reason, as if we're gonna die, because that is evolutionarily where that comes from. So
Hmm.
even that is part of our context. We can't evaluate ourselves as though we're not part of our biology,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? That's also part of our context is our biology, and you're not this singular thing that doesn't have to respond to a sympathetic nervous system impulses, and then
Yeah.
not to judge yourself based on that, and the fact that you can name it and have safe places to talk about it and chaperone it, right from that place. So I
Yeah.
call it self and IFS, that compassionate presencing that we can do with ourselves.
Yeah. And I think because we're 20% of the population, we tend to be in the minority. We tend to experience feeling othered, not accepted, told that we're different. We look at what everybody else is doing, producing. I have a client who just moved and all the roommates are unpacked, and my client is really struggling due to a number of things and tremendous trauma. And the move has been really, really difficult. And my client has just had to accept that it's going to take them longer to process the move and it's undoing to be in the kitchen and not be able to find the things that they normally would know where they are. and feeling like there's something wrong with my client because all the roommates unpacked in a day and are just moving about their lives. I mean, these are the things that we struggle with, and we look and go, what's wrong with us? And so again, all the things that we're talking about, it just shows up all over the place. And even what I'm talking about of, can I just embrace who I am, and how do I fit into a group that may not be full of HSPs, and how do I show up authentically, and what do I share and what do I not share, and do I test it, and do it? All of these things fit together that we're talking about. Ugh.
I just want to crawl through and like give you a ginormous hug.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. Oh, it's hard. I think that so I had a couple of things while you were talking. I was angry. I got angry. I get so angry by like our lack of tolerance for diversity of all
Mhm.
kinds, including this neurodiversity. Let's just make some space for each other
Right.
and how we are all different. Diversity is a beautiful thing. I see that sort of judgy intolerance as just symptomatic of that really big problem in our society,
Yeah.
right? Called white supremacy. Go all the way there.
Misogyny, patriarchy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That it's this here's the norm and here's the ideal, and anything that's not that is other is and it's funny because like that's the myth. Diversity is what's real. And
Mhm.
as an HSP, really in this place of being kind of angry. I feel like that the whole like, oh, you're too sensitive. It's not really like that. I'm Buddhist primarily, so I don't believe in like original sin, but I grew up Catholic. But what I think that does exist is this like original gaslighting. Like it's that original undermining of, and typically a very young person when it first starts happening, their experience.
Mhm.
And those wounds are real. That it's sometimes we call it an orientation injury. Can I trust myself? Can I trust what I'm experiencing? Can I be curious and kind? And it flips us right into that weird, judgy place when we
Yeah.
when we drink the Kool-Aid
Yeah.
of other people telling us that we shouldn't be the way we are.
And so you end up believing that there's something wrong with you and you're not meeting that standard constantly. So that feeling of not enoughness is just very prevalent. And to even recognize that you're in that place and that this is not the reality. I mean, even that primary wound is just a hard one.
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah.
The funny thing is I'm almost convinced like we all have it somewhere. Like whether it's HSP or whether growing up gay or being different in some way. Like there's so many ways to be diverse and to be different that
Mhm.
I don't know. This is where my optimist self comes out. It's like there's some unifying energy there. And once we hit some sort of critical mass, and maybe things will just flip.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that those of us that have had hardships tend to be more empathic, more sensitive. I mean, being an HSP is an innate trait, but I was thinking back to when I was a kid, I would always look for the people that looked like they had some hardships because it felt like they were more empathic and more understanding as opposed to the how come you're not like everybody else and just get over it.
Yeah, I think as I'm hanging out with my children, my daughter, and seeing her friends and the way they kind of show up with a lot more spaciousness for each other, I am
Mhm.
ultimately super hopeful
Mhm.
that there'll be spaces for and that kind of relational safety, which brings us back to where we started, right? Attending to the relationship.
Right. And how do you learn that it's safe to show up authentically and know that people can respond to you in a way that's going to be nurturing and supportive versus just get over it. What's wrong with you? You're always making a big deal out of things.
Yeah, it's funny. I think there's something about the energy of stepping into it, presuming some understanding. I just had in trying to organize this slumber party for my daughter, there was one participant's mom. It was a small group, but looking at summer camps, had some concerns about COVID and we were texting. She was telling me, she wasn't sure her daughter would really be able to come
Mhm.
because of she didn't want to be like psycho mom about asking everyone to test.
Mhm.
And I was like, "Well, I'll ask." Like, and I didn't say who it was, or I just said,
Mhm.
"I have a participant that needs to be." And it was funny, the gratitude. She was just like, I think she even said, like, "You're unreal. This is not someone I know well. In fact, this may be
Mhm.
only our second interaction." Sometimes when we carry that energy, and I think this is what's part of being a trained HSP instead of as opposed to an untrained HSP, where you can hold space for yourself, where you know that it's okay to have your boundaries. For me, it's always easier to do it on someone else's behalf. I may struggle with this mightily if it was me who
Sure.
was going to ask everybody to COVID test, but I always find it easier. As like I have a women's self compassion group too, and that it's always easier to do it for someone else.
Yeah.
So I'm like, yeah, I'll do that for you, easy, and like I'll even let her know like everyone's coming back like really affirmative and supportive,
Mhm.
and again, this speaks to why we need each other. So I do think that once I've been able to stand in this space of, and this is like the anti gaslighting, like
Mhm.
it's that no, I'm actually not too sensitive. I'm sensitive in comparison to something else, right? Because everything's relative to something else.
Right.
And that I am fully empowered because I'm sovereign,
Mhm.
right? Here's my crown. I'm going to straighten it on my head to ask. And if you don't want to, you have the freedom to not do that.
Right.
And then I'm staying in choice because then I have to respond to your choice. But that, there's not this like, I don't get tangled up in trying to manipulate the situation. It is what it is. That's meeting life on life's terms. So far, I haven't had someone come back with, what? That's crazy. Thank
Yeah.
goodness. Everybody is kind of being helpful. But that's the risk, right? The
Right.
risk is that vulnerability of asking for what you need. And
Right.
then if it doesn't go well, I've got information. This is where I go to data points.
Mhm.
Instead of this, oh, I was wrong to ask, or I shouldn't have done that. I didn't get the affirmative response. It's like, oh, wow, I have some data points about this person.
Right.
And I would say with someone's being judgy, right? Like you have data points about them. Like you know who you are.
Right. Well, you also created safety for this mom that she knows that she can come to you probably again with a concern, knowing that you will meet her with kindness and compassion. So that creates more of that openness and vulnerability and trust because of how you met her.
Mm-hmm.
And with
Mm-hmm.
COVID, we do a birthday party with another family in the month of May because everybody except the moms have May birthdays. And there's a restaurant we always go to, and we scheduled it. And then I thought, I'm not comfortable eating inside. And I knew that I was the only one that would have that issue. But if I didn't go and my husband went, then it still runs the risk of him bringing COVID home. So I had to say, hey, that's not going to work for me. Here are some other options. And it worked out. We switched gears and did that. And the other thing that happened is my son's dog is with us now, and then my son is here for the week. And it didn't occur to me that the reason why we watched his dog, because he and his girlfriend were in Vegas, where they did some party buses, they did some pub crawls without masks.
Mm.
And we assumed some risk. And then I am getting together with a friend tomorrow who, like I am, is very concerned about COVID and long COVID. And I had to say, hey, I need to let you know that nobody's having symptoms, but I don't want to expose you. And so she went through some like, well, I don't want to make you uncomfortable. It's like whoever needs the most space gets it. That's what I want in my life. And so I said, if you don't want to get together, I'm totally fine. So we worked something out. But again, these are the ways that we create safety in relationships. And especially around all the uncertainty. And it didn't even occur to me to tell her like, oh, I need to let you know I've been exposed to some, what I would call high risk behavior. It's not something I would do. And he gets to choose what he wants to do.
Yeah. I like what you said that though. Like it's important to create that safety and whoever needs the most space, if you have it in you to give it. And then even if you didn't, at least there's that respect there.
Mhm.
You know, I'm hoping that COVID taught us a lot of lessons in having awkward conversations and on it really honest ones
Yeah.
with respect because everyone landed somewhere slightly different on that continuum
Mhm.
of comfort.
I think in some ways it's pushed people to have uncomfortable conversations. And one of my favorite stories is I have a friend who works for this company and she's been able to work from home and they're pushing for people to go back into the office and she's just not comfortable. And she was thinking about starting her own business and going out on her own, but not this early. And so she was very clear that if they force her to go back, she's going to quit. And the company's making a big deal about how important it is to everybody to go back into the office a couple days a week, and it's expected of everybody, and not very supportive of letting people make choices. But because she was clear that you tell me I have to come in, I'm quitting. And then they ended up doing a turnabout, and she didn't have to say she was quitting, but when she set her limit, they're like, fine, you can work at home. So often it's like this, it reminds me of the Wizard of Oz. We think that our companies have these, they're huge and they're powerful and they make all these demands. And then when you get clear on what you want, you go like, nope, not going to happen. Eh, I recognize not everybody has the privilege to be able to do that because not everybody can afford to lose their job or is ready to leave their job. But it was such an empowering story about she got clear on what she was and wasn't willing to do and stood up for it, and then it worked.
Well, I think the world needs our information. Like when we're too scared to set it out there, we actually, maybe that's what gets us further on that hamster wheel, because
Mhm.
we do get more detached because we haven't been contributing our thoughts, feelings, and behavior, often because we are really, really frightened.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as a listener, what you might consider is think about a situation where it's feeling like it's too much pressure, you feel an obligation, just to get curious and ask if you couldn't make a wrong mistake, what is it that you would want? You may not be ready to implement it. You may not be ready to do anything about it. But I think even just starting to allow yourself to think about this isn't working for me. This is what I would want to do. And I'm not ready to say anything yet. I think at least starting to generate those ideas to have self compassion and understanding. And then if you don't want to do it, the next step, if you want to take it, is what am I concerned would happen if I did this? People are going to get mad at me. I'm going to get fired. They're going to judge me. No one's going to like me. I'm going to be seen as an outcast. I don't know what those things would be. And then the next step would be, what would happen if those things happened? Can I manage? Are those my people? Would I want to do something differently? That you can just get curious and start exploring each step that's further and further, because it's so important. We tend to be so other and outward focused. And for me, my goal is to have people really be internally focused about what's okay, what do I want, what is not okay. And we come from that place. It doesn't mean that we're not going to have fears about being judged or criticized, but we can learn to tolerate that. I mean, to me, that's the ultimate place that I would like to see people be. I mean, how about you, Jen?
Absolutely. And as you're talking, I'm just thinking about if we can be internally brave to ask those questions of ourselves and to sort of go there, even though it may be very emotionally evocative,
Mm-hmm.
then perhaps that'll help us train for being a little braver outside too.
Yeah.
Or not. Like those are choices we all have to make. But at least it opens up the possibility when we can do that inside ourselves and maybe even just with one or two other people.
Yeah. And if you have somebody that's supportive or gets you a therapist to coach, sometimes just getting it out of your head and having somebody else validate it, because I think the stories in our head are often so not in alignment with what the reality is, and sometimes even just speaking it out loud, which is what I think is so powerful about at Marco Polo, which I'm not getting any money for promoting, but just being able to verbalize what's going on and have somebody who's in your corner to start thinking like, "Ooh, maybe this isn't right. Maybe I do deserve more."
Yeah, I think actually that's one way to get off that hamster wheel and get on the path.
Yeah. And I guess just to wrap up, we started out talking about how do you show up messy and imperfect, and you and I have been you and I have been living that this last week. And it's been beautiful and it's been messy and it's been yummy and uncomfortable because we've each been going through our own things, but have really shown up authentically and vulnerable. You had some gremlins, I had some gremlins. We just talked about it. Just as nice to rest in that. And part of what my fear is that the connection feels so yummy that I worry that it's going to change, that it's not going to last. And it probably will shift, but to trust that we will shift with that as well.
Absolutely. That's how you know you're alive, right?
Yeah.
You're growing and shifting.
Yeah.
To be too still is not good news.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I have every bit of faith about that. And it's the aliveness is that risk? Is the risking the communication? Is the, oof, is it safe? Yes, it is.
Yeah.
There's more data points. That's more information.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap this up?
No, just thank you. I stepped into our space today not thinking I could show up, and I feel really happy that I did.
You always do a beautiful job, and you're so great about just pivoting.
It's so fun. I love it. I love that.
All right. Well, thanks for being here today, Jen. Have a great day.
You too, my dear. Thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. Bye. Hey again. I'm curious to know how much of that resonated for you. Where do you struggle with feeling like you're not showing up well enough? You're not doing things well enough. You want to let go. You're exhausted. If you let go, it's not going to be done the same way that you want it done. Fear of being judged, feeling tired. I mean, things are hard right now in the world just as it is. And then everything on top of that, being a deep feeler, a deep thinker, it's hard. Are there ways that you want to ease things up? And can you do that? Can you use the suggestions that we talked about, or do you need to get extra support? If you want some extra support, you can reach out to Jen at heartfulnessconsulting.com. You can reach out to me at unapologeticallysensitive.com. We love helping people live their best lives. It's a little bit early, but I just want to give you a heads up that the next online HSP course will be starting mid-September. I think I'm just going to be running 2 courses a year. I'm not sure. I know depending on when you listen, I keep changing, but it just sort of depends on what's going on and who's signing up. My plan is to have some episodes with participants who have taken the course that you haven't heard. You can go to my website at unapologeticallysensitive.com. You can go to the HSP groups page. I'm thinking by the time you hear this, I should have the new dates up there. I just have a lot going on. I think that's it. I hope you are doing well. I hope you are having some peace. If you're struggling and things are hard, that's okay too. Hopefully, there's a balance of the tough stuff and the stuff that feels more satisfying. Remember, sensitivity is nothing to apologize for. It's our superpower. Have a blessed day.